I'm sorry, Moti, the Achun is some Mechzilang so I apologize. So we started yesterday the Mishnah on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, and the Mishnah had a massive chiddush of Rabbi Yosy, and that was that there's a unique carbon, the carbon of Kivsei Atzeres. Moshe, you can need your help. Kivsei Atzeres, not Shei, right? The carbon of Kivsei Atzeres, and the Shtei Alechem is a unique carbon because Rabbi Yosy says if you had kavana only to eat one of the chalos chutz lizmanoi, only that one becomes pigol and not the other one. The Rabbanan say it's one carbon. If this challah is pigol, that challah is pigol, all things pigol. Rabbi Yosy is a massive chiddush that by the shtei halechem, the two breads are completely independent of one another. We'll see how independent they are soon, but they're completely independent of one another, and therefore just because one became osur with a chi of course to eat it because of pickle of chutz l'zmanoi, it doesn't impact the other one. But that's what we saw in the Mishnah. Rav Huna said, let's take Rabbi Yosy one step further. Never mind if it's two separate breads, let's even say if you had kavanah to eat one yerech chutz l'zmanoi, and therefore it's pigel, and there'll be a chi of course if you eat it, the other yerech won't be pigel in one animal. That's even a bigger chiddush. So he's saying just like you see in one carbon, the two breads are completely two separate things. Zok Reb Huna, maybe Rabbi Yosy holds even in one animal, the two yerechos are two separate things. That was the chiddush of Reb Huna that we're going to be challenging yesterday and we're going to be challenging today.
When did you have in mind that?
Oh, so when did he have that machshav in mind? Very good question. Reb Huna brings a raya. He brings a raya misvara. And that is, if you had two yerechos, the right and the left, and one became tamei, would the other one be tamei? No. So why is pigel any different? That's what Rav Huna said. So that answer when it happened. If the two yerechos were connected to one animal and the shared touched animal, the whole animal is tamei. So it must be this whole shaila is only if the pigel happened after they were separated. So it couldn't have happened during the shechita, because during the shechita it's one animal. So you have to say that right after the shechita, they cut the animal in half, and they split the two yerechos from one another, and then he did the Kabbalah Saddam, with the machshava of pigel on the yerech hayibid. Or he did the halacha, with the machshava of shaloi b'chutz l'zmanoi on the yerech hayimin. Or he did the zrika. But it couldn't have happened, this whole story had to have happened after the two yerechos were separated. Because if they're combined, for sure it's one item. I don't know. The guy shechted it, and then as soon as the other. Okay, so maybe the halacha. It would have to. The case would have to be where the machshava of pigel came after the animal was already split. Right? So if it wouldn't be possible to do this by the zrika, but in Kabbalah, so by the halacha. So that's. It actually is possible to do because you don't have to be mekabel al dam. You just have to be mekabel al dam to do the zrikas. So the first bit of dam you don't have to be mekabel, and you can quickly cut it in half and then be mekabel. Lachatchili is supposed to be mekabel al dam, but this guy is a pigelnik. He's a pigelnik. A pigelnik is maybe not makbar to be mekabel al dam too. It's a new zach, a pigelnik. Okay. So that's what the Gemara said. The Gemara said Rav Huna wanted to be mechavish a chiddush in Rabbi Yosy and take it to a new level. And say that one animal, you look at its individual components as separate items, and if one is asher mishum pigol, not necessarily would the other be asher mishum pigol. And the Gemara attacks, and the Gemara ends up having three kashas to prove Rav Huna wrong. The first kasha we started last night, and we quoted a brisa, an anonymous brisa. We quoted an anonymous brisa that said the following halacha. Now, an anonymous brisa, we're going to have to prove that this anonymous brisa was written by Rabbi Yosy if we're trying to prove anything that regarding Rabbi Yosy. So the brisa says, and it's referring again to the Kivsei Atzeres and the Shtei Alachem, La'olam ein boy kares. There will never be kares because of a machshav of pigel ad sheyifagel b'shteyan b'kazayis. Very interesting. Unless the kavanah of pigel is on both breads, so you have to have kavanah to eat both breads chutz l'zmanoi, but it would be enough if it was one kazayis combined from the two breads, which is a half a kazayis from each bread. So let's think about this. The Gemara is medaik b'shtein in ba'achas men loy. If you had kavana only to eat only one of the breads, chos l'zmanoi, then the other bread would not be pickled, right? Because the brayso is medavka b'shtein. You have to have a machshava of pickle on both breads, albeit a little bit, but it has to be both breads. So right off the bat, this brayso cannot be going according to the Rabbanan. Because the Rabbanan in our Mishnah said very clearly, if you had kavanah only to eat one bread chutlas manoi, the whole korban is pickled, even the other bread. So right off the bat, this brayso cannot be going according to the Rabbanan. So by process of elimination, who's it going according to? It's going according to Rabbi Yosy. And that's why you need to have b'shtein. But the problem is, in Lamaita, according to Rabbi Yosy, it's two separate breads. V'horaya, if you only had kavanah of pickle on one, it wouldn't be pickle on another. So here, you don't have a shir achila from bread A, and you don't have a shir achila of bread B. So what? Because your kavanah was to have a kazayis from both of them together, that magically bonds them together? It's a very big chiddush to say that it should magically bond them together. Now, but the chiddush wouldn't be such a big chiddush if you held that in one animal, both yerechos are one. But so basically, if you hold both yerechos are one, it's still a stretch. It's still a stretch to say that both breads are one. But if you hold even in one animal, the yerech yamin and the yerech hashmal are two different animals, and because one's pickled, the other one's not pickled, how in the world are you going to stretch and say that b'machshavah, since you thought to have a kazayis of both together, that makes them one bread? If it's mamish one animal, Rabbi Yosy considers it two separate animals. So two separate breads, because of your fantasy machshava, it's going to make it like one. So B'Ishlama, if Rabbi Yosy does not hold like Rav Huna, and he holds that since there's two yerechs that are part of the same animal, it's one. No matter what, you can't separate them. So then, b'machshava, you might be able to say that I could combine the two breads into one. But if it's mamish part of the same animal, even there Rabbi Yosy holds it's considered two separate animals. Kol shekin v'kol shekin, two breads that are separate, my machshava shouldn't be able to combine them. That was the kasha. It's a little bit of a fuzzy logic, but it's a gewaltige raya. So that was the Gemara's question yesterday. Because if you only right, so that's the magic. That's why it's magic. Rabbi Yosy says there's two separate lechems. It's completely two separate lechems. If I had kavod pickle on A, it would zero impact B. Yet, if I want to make them and bring them together so that one kazayis that's from both of them together would count as a kazayis, my magical fantasy in my brain could make that happen. So Bishlam, if it's taka one, he considers it one. So maybe with your machshava you could put these two things together. But even if it's mamish one, he holds it's two. How are you going to use your fantasy machshava to put it together? That's the Gemara's kasha on Rabbi Yosy. So let's see the Gemara inside. Because yesterday I just pushed onto Amud Aleph even without getting clarity, because I had my joke that I had to get onto Amud Aleph. Jetzt coming this learning. So Zog to Gemara, I'm the third line from the bottom on Yud Gimel Amud Beis. Which one?
To get onto the top of the page of that day.
L'olam ein boy karais ad sheyifagel b'shtein b'kazayis. That's the Lashon HaBraisa. L'olam ein boy karais ad sheyifagel b'shtein b'kazayis. Zog to Gemara b'shtein in ba'achas mehen loy. So right off the bat, this cannot be going according to the Rabbanan. Mani ileba Rabbanan afilu ba'achas mehen nami. Why do you need b'shtein? Ela pshita Rabbi Yosy. This must be going according to Rabbi Yosy. Zok Gemara iyom b'shlam achad gufa. Who, if you're b'shlam, you're going to say that at least two yerechos, Yemin and Shmuel is one guf. So then mishum hachi mistarv, you could say with your machshava, you could even make two breads into one. But if you can hold, even if it's mamish one, it's not one. Aliyam trei gufaninu. So how b'machshava are you going to make two separate breads into one? If it's mamish one, you don't hold it's one. Mimit tarfi, as Rashi says right at the top of the Amid, Ali'i amrit gabi yerechos. The mechad gufa, they literally come from the same guf. You still say trei gufa ninu, and therefore v'impigol zu b'loy zu loy nispak lazu, as Rav Huna wants to say a huge chiddush in Rabbi Yosy, well gabi chalois, where it's takatu. Ki irvan lechel kazayis mishtein, you with your machshava wanted to make two into one. Mimitz tarfi, how could you possibly conceive that would work? Mi mahanya irv machshavosoi lemahama chad gufa trey where it's mamish chad guf. Tvei mechiber zevach lemahanu litztarif. The Yeshiva changes the word. If it's mamish one guf, he considers it two gufin. So if it's two gufin, you can be mitzaref them. It's like it's an impossible svara. So Elamai, you have a Rai from here. Where Rabbi Yosy holds that if the Yerch Shal Yamin is Pigol, who adin the Yerch Shal Shmoil, and Rav Huna is Agishlot. Zog to Gemara, Lav Davka. Hamani Rebbe. You're making an assumption. It's either going according to the Rebbe, either going according to Rabbi Yosy or according to the Rabbanon. Maybe it's going to according to a third party, so you don't so you don't have any right to Rabbi Yosy. And maybe it's going according to Rebbe. Now, what did Rebbe say that would make him even relevant to this discussion? The Tanya we learned, Hashoichet es a keves, lechol chatzi zayis michalazu. So you shechted keves 1 to eat a chatzi zayis of chala 1. That's sign not the full matir, because remember there's two by the kivsei tzeres. There's two parallel. What's the legal explanation of the two equal bodies of government? Whenever the House wants to do an investigation and the Supreme Court wants to overrule them, they say we're equal parallel bodies of government. You can't tell us what to do. We can't tell you what to do. Now with the House being split, there's a lot of fights about that. So they're equal, but they're parallel. By the two kivsei tzeres, they're equal, but they're parallel. So there's a chatzi matir, right? And it's also a chatzi achila in each one. So if you have two dings against it, why it shouldn't be pigol? Sai it's a chatzi matir. Sai it's a chatzi oicho. So Hashoichet is a case of lechol chatzi zayis michalazu. V'chein chaver lechol chatzi zayis michalazu. So A, keves A with a half a kazayis of bread A, keves B with a half a kazayis of bread B. Rabbi said, Omer Nish is a kosher. They're 100% kosher. There's no reason in the world why there should be any problem here. This is not pigol. As Rashi says, Shezek kosher, lahakter murva l'lechal basar, it's a perfectly kosher carbon. Dolei chishav el chatzi achila, b'chatzi mater. We're not even close to being pigol. So let's analyze this. When was Rabbi mater? When did Rabbi say there's no problem with pigol? Taima de Omer chatzi chatzi. That's because by each keves there was no achila. There was only half of the achila. Aval Omer kezayis mishtehen mitzdarif. But if he said exactly the case of the Bryce at the bottom of Amud Beis, when he's shechting each keves, he means to include machshavas pigol of one kezayis combined from the two breads, it would be mitzarif. So that's a perfect example. That's exactly what the case was on Amud Beis. So let's say that the author of that Bryce Avlo Oilam is Rebbe. So yeah, Rebbe might not hold like Rav Huna, but Rabbi Yosy, his shot Rav Huna works very well. Frek the Gemara, you're not out of the dark yet at all, because Rebbe has to have an opinion about the machloikis, Rabbi Yosy and the Rabban. He can't say I don't want to get involved in politics. He has to have an opinion about the shaila of the last Mishnah. If you had kavanah pickled by one bread, would it make the whole carbon possible? So for Rebbe al liba deman, who does Rebbe hold like legabe this shaila? Al liba de Rabbanon. If he holds like the Rabbanon, back to the same question. Afilu ba'achas mehenami. Even if it wasn't kazayis mishtein, even with kazayis from one of them, the whole carbon would be possible. Going to the Bach, he sticks to the word Ella. Al liba de Rabbi Yosy. Elamai hold the Rabbi Yosy. So Hadra Kushin L'Duchte, we're right smack dab back where we started from. So blaming it on Rebbe doesn't help, because Rebbe also has to have an opinion about the Machlokes, Rabbi Yosy and the Rabbanon. So you see, according to Rabbi Yosy, at the end of the day, Rabbi Yosy at the end of the day says that even though you could separate the two lachmei of the shtei lechem, you cannot split an animal in half. If one part is pigol, the other part is pigol. Zogt Gemara efshir nicht. Maybe we can say that the Bryce on Amud Beis is going according to the Rabbanon. You had a kasha according to the Rabbanon, it doesn't have to be mishteyan. Even if I only had kavanah of a chilos pigol, of a chilos chutas mana, and one of the lecham, it answers everything. And from the Bryce it's mashma, you need from both. Zogt Gemara v'loy tema achi yifagel b'shteyan. Don't read the Bryce that it says you have to have kavanah of pigol b'shteyan, referring to the lechem, both of the lechems. No. It's taka like Rabban said in the Mishnah, even if you only had kavanah of achilas chutzlas mamay on one of the breads. Ella, you know what you have to read the Brisa saying it? Ella ema achivagel b'shneyen. In order for it to be pigel, you have to have this kavanah of pigel by the kevis number 1, and you have to have the same achshava by kevis number 2. Otherwise, it's only chatzi matir, right? The matir of the lechem is kevis 1 and kevis 2 have to be shechted. So all the Brisa is saying is, even according to the Rabbanon, you have to have a kavanah of pigel sai when you shech the kevis number 1, and sai when you shech the kevis number 2, about the same one kazayis in one bread. So don't read the Brisa as b'shtein referring to 2 breads, because the Rabbanon holds 1 bread's enough, but it has to be both kvasim.
It's in Keva, it stays in Keva, it's in the Challah.
That's right. So a lechem is the lashon keva, and the kevis, I guess, is lashon zocher.
Yeah, it's
Kvasi.
Huh?
You say
Not
kvasi.
kvasois. Ah, so it stims. It stims. Gewaltig. So, but vafilu ba'achas men, even if both machshavas pigel are only about eating 1 challah. Why was it important for the Brisa in the Rabbanon to make that point clear? Because there are those who hold that even if you only had kavana, when you shechted 1 keves with a machshav of pigel, that would also be pigel. Because they hold yesh pigel b'chatzi matir. Ulafuki mit Rab Meir. Rab Meir would disagree with the Brisa. The Omar mefaglin b'chatzi matir kamash malon deloy. So before we go weiter, let's go look at the lashon of Brisa based on our new pshat. So the new pshat is we're going according to Rabbanan. La'olam ein by karis. There will not be a chiv karis eating the lachmei of the shtei alachem. Ad sheyifagel b'shneyen b'kazayis. In each keves, you have to have kavana, even to eat only 1 of the 2 breads, but a kazayis. So when you shech the keves number 1, you have to have a machshava to eat bread number 1 chutz manoi, and when you shech the keves number 2, you also have to have kavana to at least eat bread number 1 again chutz manoi. And you don't have any kavana at all about the second bread, because according to the Rabbanon, it's all 1 carbon. And once it becomes pigel, everything becomes pigel. The problem that we're now going to run into is, you know what it should have said? Based on this pshat, that all we're trying to do is be afuke from Reb Meir. All the Brisa here is trying to say is, ein mefaglin b'chatzi matir. Right? That's all we're trying to say. So you know what the Brisa should have said? Ein boikaris ad sheyifagel b'shneim. What's the lo'olam? The lo'olam sounds like, don't say this and don't say that, only this. If we're only trying to exclude 1 cheetah of Reb Meir, the word la'olam zok to Gemara is not an appropriate lashon. So let's have a look at the Gemara weiter. Frank the Gemara. Ihachi my la'olam. Why did the Brisa use such a radical lashon of la'olam, which sounds like we're trying to be la'afuke from multiple wrong opinions? Iyamut bishlama bishtayin uvishnayin. Bishlam, if you're going to hold that in order for the bread to become pigel, you have to have this kavanah pigel by the shechita of both kvasim, because ein mefagel b'chatzi mater, and you have to have the machshava by both breads because of Rabbi Yosy shita that each bread is independent. Now it makes sense to say la'olam, because you're bavorning 2 different things, not to paskin like. So and therefore it's lafulkim midir Meir legabe the shita of emafagel b'chatzi mater, and umidir Rabbanon, and also lafulkim the shita of the Rabbanon in the machlokes between Rabbanon and Yosy, that it's enough to have a machshav of pigel in 1 bread, rather you have to have it on both breads. So then it makes sense. If it's lafulkim midir Meir the Rabbanon kasi, how do you come with la'olam, a radical lashon of la'olam? You can't have any other variation, only this. Eli Amrit Rabbanon, and it's only ulafukim midir Meir, my la'olam. La'olam is too a radical lashon to use, when all we're just trying to tell you is 1 simple halacha. So we're at the point now where we rejected the possibility of learning the Brisa according to the Rabbanon, because la'olam doesn't make sense. So we're forced to say that the Brisa is going according to Rabbi Yosy. And Rabbi Yosy is saying that b'machshava you could put these 2 breads together even though technically they're separate. So kol shekena must be that you have 2 yerechos for the same animal, for sure that's 1 on the same. Right? That was the Gemara. Right? So basically Rav Huna has his back up against the wall. He seems to be August Logan, because from this Brisa it's mashma that Avadeh Rabbi Yosy would hold by the 2 yerechos. If 1's pigel, they're both pigel. But we have 2 more kashas on Rav Huna. V'oid. Ha'amar Ravashi Toshma. Ravashi also had a kasha on Rav Huna. Rabbi Omer, Rabbi Shum, Rabbi Yosy. Rabbi said in the name of Rabbi Yosy. Now, among the next lines that I'm going to read will make no sense to us until the Brisa elaborates. So, if you don't have what I'm talking about, then it means you're halting mit, because you're not supposed to understand what it means. Pigel bedavar hanasa bechutz, pigel bedavar hanasa b'fnim loy pigel. If the pigel was in the davar hanasa bechutz, then it will be pigel. If the pigel is in the davar hanasa b'fnim, it's loy pigel. Ketat. So right off the bat, Rashi tells us, what are we talking about? We're talking about karbonis where the zrikas adam are in the hechel. Which karbonis are the zrikas adam in the hechel? The parkoin hamashiach, the param davishal tzibur, where they made zrika of the dam. They made zrika of the dam in the hechel. Then they spilled the shirayim of this dam out on the yisoid hamizbech hachitzain. Then they were makter a murim on the mizbech hachitzain, and then they burnt the basar. Right? That's the Purim minus Rafin, the Sir minus Rafin. So what happens as follows. Ketat. He was shechting it, meaning he's not in the Hechel, he's physically standing in the Azara. V'yomar, and this was his machshava of Pigel. Hareni shoichet almanas lahazois midamay lamacher. I have kavanah that the zrika that has to be done lefnim in the Hechel, I'm going to do lamacher. Like Pigel. That would not be Pigel. Because the machshava b'chutz, a machshava that he has while he's standing and doing avodah b'chutz about b'davar nasa b'fnim, that will not be pigel. He's such a loser, this pigel that he can't even come up with a good pigel, right? For pigel tegesh enochnisht, right? Hayoyimid b'fnim. What if he was in the middle of doing this rikas adam in the hechel? V'yamar hareini maze almanas lahakter emurin lamacher. The emurin which is going to be in avodah b'chutz, I'm going to do tomorrow. Chutz l'zmanai. Or the lishbach shiraim, if you remember in Zvachim, we learned many times that the shvichit shiraim of these karbanos are ma'akiv. So the lishbach shiraim l'mocher, again like pigal. Shemachshava b'fnim b'davar nasa b'chutz. So you have to be consistent. If you're standing and doing avodah b'fnim, the machshava of pigal will only have an impact if it's a machshava on b'fnim. And if you're standing b'chutz, then the machshava of pigal will only be on something b'chutz. So what is a good pigal? Hayoymid b'chutz v'omar. Hareini shoichet almanas lishboich shirayim l'machor or lahakter emur l'machor. That's bullseye. That's a pigel shemachshava b'chutz b'davar anasa b'chutz. He had his machshava while he was doing an avodah b'chutz, and his machshava was about something that also gets done b'chutz. That's pigel. So let's understand. He had kavanah that he's going to do the shvicha shirayim chutz l'zmanai. So what becomes pigel? What exactly becomes osur lachila? Pigel means there's a chiv chorus if you eat it. What are you going to be chayiv chorus if you eat in this particular case? So frank the Gemara, lishboich shirayim lefigulei mai. What exactly is now becoming osur to eat? Ilay malafluge dam lefgulei dam. If you're going to say it's making pigel on the dam, right? Like Rabbi Yossi says, you could only be mafagel what you're thinking about. So the dam becomes pigel, which means besides getting a chiyuv chorus or a chatus peshoigik for eating the dam alt dam loy soichlu, he'll get another chatus or another chiyuv chorus because he ate pigel, right? So if that's what it was, dami mifko. Dam cannot become pigel. Dam cannot become also because of pigel. Because in Zvachim we learned a rule that in pigel there's the matir. While you're doing the matir, you have a kavanah of pigel to do either another matir or an achila of chutz l'zmanoi, right? So we learned that a matir could never become also machmus pigel. The dover hanitar, like the shirayim, could become also machmus pigel. But the dover hamatir could never become also machmus pigel. Dam is the ultimate matir. It's matir the basur l'achila. So frank the Gemara, ilaf luke dam di dami mifko. Can dam ever become pigel? But now we learned this is a Gemara Zvachim. We learned it many times. Elu devarim she'ein chayav nalei mishum pigel. The following items could never be usher to eat with an iser chorus because of pigel, because they're matirin. Hakoybitz, valavayna, vakitayus, uminchas kayanim, which are kulam nesrafim, uminchas nesachim, uminchas koyd mashiach. These are all only matirim. They are not dvarim that become mutter. Or vadam. So dam could never become also pigel. So here he had a machshava to shvicha shirayim chutz l'zmanoi, What's becoming usher? Where is the pigel here? Ella, what are you going to be forced to say? El pshita lafkule basar. So he has machshava of pigel according to Rabbi Yossi on the dam, and something completely different is becoming usher. The basar is becoming usher. That's like Yerech Yemin and Yerech Shmuel already. In this brisa, you're not even thinking about basar at all on pigel. You're thinking about dam. Yet the basar will become pigel. Rabbi Yossi mivkel. Here I'm thinking about this animal, the meat of the animal I'm thinking to eat. And you're going to say the other Yerech doesn't become osir? Like Kolshagain, the pigel b'Yerech Yemin, pigel b'Yerech Shmuel? Madach pigel on dam will aser basar. Kolshagain pigel on this basar will aser the other basar. So now that's strike 2 against Rav Huna. How could you say that only part of the animal becomes pigel? And now comes strike 3. But this is similar to the attack on Iran. There's not going to be one bomb. They're going to get obliterated. Ravina. Ravina said, Tashma. The Lublini strikes again. Tashma. Hakayimit is a mincha. Lecho. I wanted all the pressure that Trump is getting to attack Iran is garnished. Now that the Lublini is Nageya, now he's going to have to attack Iran. With them coming the Chnashdingen. So Tashma Hakayimit is a mincha. Lecho Shiorah. Oilahakter Koimtza Lamocher. So he made the Kmitza and he had in Zinin that he's going to be maktir the Koimitz tomorrow. So what was his machshav of Pigalon? His machshav of Chutzlas Manoi on the Koimitz. The Koimitz is a matir, right? Moide Rabbi Yossi Bezu. The Koimitz is a matir. The Koimitz.
But his pigel is on the Shirayim.
Well, there's two cases. Either he had kavanah to eat the shiraim, yeah, they're the pickles from Davar Nitter. But I'm focusing on the lahak the koimta, right? So moed Rabbi Yossi bezu shepigel v'chayovin aleh koris, right? We had that mishnah yesterday. So let's understand lahak the koimta. If his kavanah was to be makti the koimitz chutzlas manoi lef gulemai, what's becoming pigel? What's becoming osir to eat? Ilem lef gule the koimitz itself. Once again, Kaimitz be mivkul to davar matter, but non el dvarim. The same price we quoted a moment ago. Shein chayovin lemishum pigel hakaimitz. El pshita by having a machshava of pigel on the kaimitz, what's going to become also lachil b'shakaris liv kulishirayim. So I can make the same argument. Hashta uma hosam delay chashav v'hu b'shirayim gufei. Madich in the case of the kaimitz. Rabbi Yossi holds that even though I'm not even thinking of the shiraim, my machshavas pigel has nothing to do with the shiraim. It's only on the kovetz. Yet the shiraim will become osir b'tayris pigel. I'm thinking about the meat, part of the meat of this very carbon that I'm going to eat it. Chutzlas manoi, loy kol shekeh, that everything should become osir. So because of that, Rav Huna is very schwer. We have 3 bomba kashas on Rav Huna, and because of that, Rabbi Yochanan argues on Rav Huna. El Omer Rabbi Yochanan, not like Rav Huna. And in fact, if you were mafagel the Yerech Hayamin, the Yerech Shmuel is also pigel. Hanu time with Rabbi Yossi, but what is the svar of Rabbi Yossi? What's the svar of Rabbi Yossi by the shtei lechem? Because if you think about it, why should the pigel of Yerech Yamin and Yerech Shmuel be different than the shtei lechem? The shtei lechem, you mefagel one lechem, it's not mefagel the other lechem. So why taka? Can't you compare it to the meat? Rav Huna had a good svara. The problem is we had many rice that's not true. But Lamaisa, it's a good argument. What's the difference between the fact that if a mafagel one bread, the other bread doesn't become osir, versus if a mafagel one yerech, the other yerech becomes osir? They're both 2 parts. Okay, the yerech both come from the same animal, but Lamaisa, there's a good argument to say they should be similar. Zok Rabbi Yochanan, the halacha in our Mishnah, where Rabbi Yossi said that by shtei alechem, the 2 lechamim are independent, that's exer sakosov. There's special psukim that tell us this interesting contradictory paradox that exists by the shtei alechem. Because think about it. By the shtei alechem, they're considered 2 separate karbonis. For haraya, Rabbi Yossi holds if you have machshava pigel to eat one bread chutzlas manoi, the other bread is no problem. Right? Yet the same Rabbi Yossi said that if I had kavana to eat a kazayis of 2 breads combined, that is pigel. Isn't that a paradox minei ubei? Is it two separate karbanis or is it one? Zok Rabbi Yochanan, it's both. Hanyu Tamid Rabbi Yosy, because Akosov also of Guf Echad, also in Guf Echad, the Torah in one place says that they're one carbon. V'Akosov also in Shnei Gufim. Guf Echad, where does the Torah say it's Guf Echad? The Ma'akva Adadi. We're going to see in Rashi that you need to have both lechamim. If you only have one lechem, the carbon is possible. So you see, it's one requirement. It's one carbon. They're not independent of each other. But on the other hand, Shnei Gufin, the Amar Achmana Hal Lechudu Avida, V'Hal Lechudu Avida. You can't make one big bread, maybe cut it in half. You have to do the complete process of lisha and aricha and afia. All has to be done separately, one for each of the two lechems. So since the Torah also gives the Shtei Alechem a split personality, in one way it's one, in one way it's two, so therefore, Arvinu, if you were ma'arv them by having kavanah to have one kazais of two breads together, misarvin, your machshava will work. You know why your machshava will work? Because the Torah said that because of us on gufechad. But pelginu, if you only had kavanah on one lechem and not the other lechem, it's also going to be separate. Miflugi. That because of us on shnei gufin. So the Torah gives it a split personality. It considers it one guf and it considers it two gufin. So Rabbi Yossi applies it as he sees fit. When you want to be ma'arv it with your das and you want one kazais and both together, we'll look at it like it's one carbon and it will be mafagal. But if you want to separate them and you only have kavanah to eat one with a machshavas pigel and not the other, then we will say that it's not pigel.
You have a cooler and a chumrah and all
Yeah,
in one.
it's all because it's exeris akosim, and therefore you can't still it sue to any other pigel. There's exeris akosim that defines shtei alechem is a very unique carbon where it's two lechem and it's one lechem all in one.
When you prepare this, you saying that you can't make one batter to keep it.
Let's see Rashi inside. Rashi goes to that exactly. Hakos of us on guf echad, hakos of us on shnei gufin. That's on the fourth line, right above the Gemara. Hakos of us on guf echad, the ma'akve hadoni. One without the other, the whole carbon is possible. The izuk sheir b'loizu. The chsiv it says shtayim shnei asroinim. The mashma has to be shtayim v'lo yachas. Uchsiv, it's mashma that you need two. The one carbon combined has to be of two breads. Uchsiv soilas tehiyana aloshna avaya v'chol avaya l'ikuva. So the Torah says that if you don't have both breads, the whole carbon is possible. That's considers it as one carbon. But on the other hand, that very same pasuk also on shnei gufin considers each bread to be separate. Midichtiv shtayim, the mashma, to answer Moshe's question, the chol achas lishasa v'arichasa b'fnei atzma. You can't just make one big bread and then cut it in half. Like my wife, when she makes challah, she makes 5 pounds and she splits it into different challahs. No, you have to actually have two separate doughs. The chol achas lishasa v'arichasa b'fnei atzma. So therefore, since the Torah gave the Shtei Alechem the split personality, Hilchach Arvinu, the Amr Kazayis Ben Shteyen, which is the Bryce of La'olam, Mis Arvinu is Tarfin, that cause of Asam Govechad. But Pilginu, like in our Mishnah, the Amr Amnas Lechel Mina Achas, V'lo Yirev Chaver to Ima, Mivlagi, V'ein Chaver to Pigel, the Re'akasav, Ason, Shnei Gufin. Beautiful pshat. So Shtei Alechem is in the Kibbutz Teres is a unique carbon in and by itself. It's how you want to raise children. You have to have each one needs to have their individuality, but they also have to conform with the rabbin. So our life is a balance. You have to have your individuality, but you have to know the shtel too as well. Okay, gewaltig. Boy Rabbi Yochanan. Pigel belach metoida. Now we know Rabbi Yossi says that the lechem and the shtei lechem are separated. A machshava pigel on lechem A will not impact lechem B. So, what about other types of lechamim that also have a distinction, like the lachmei toida? There's 4 individual lachmei toida. There's 4 types, right? So they're very distinct. Yet the Torah says that when you shecht on one carbon toida, they all become hutar, right? They all become huktash. So you see there's a force that's combining them, so you might consider them as one carbon. Or Lamaisa, the Torah also lists them, each one, distinctly by itself. So what happens if a person only had a machshava pigel on one of the 4 breads and not on the other 3? Would Rabbi Yossi treat it like the shtei alechem, and only the bread that he had a machshava pigel on will be usher, or maybe he looks at like a one big bread.
Expecting to concentrate before? That coin's he's got to concentrate before the plumbing?
No, better don't concentrate at all, and then it'll be kosher. It's the concentration that's causing problems.
Was there a 40? What was 40?
There are 40 breads because there's 4 types of bread, but
Times
10
10.
breads from each style.
Yeah, but it wasn't the kohen that made those breads. It was the person who was giving it.
Yeah, but the machshava of pigul is b'shas shchita. B'shas shchita, the carbon, he had in mind that he's going to eat one set of bread, chutz l'zman. Okay, so Zog to Gemara, what about by Michas Mafe? Rashi tells us, but the Michas Mafe Tanner, there were actually 2 sets of breads, 5, I believe it's 5 and 5. I believe Rashi is 5 and 5. Heichal is feirukikin. So a rokik is more like a pita, it's more thin, and the challah is much thicker. Our matzah is nothing. Our matzah is a cracker, it's a mezoinis. There, right, like the Sfardim, they make mezoinis on our matzah, but a rokik was like thin, like a pita. So it's also 2 distinct types. Alafa. It's two distinct types of breads. Would you say the same thing? Is it separate or is it the same? Mahu. So Gemara, here we don't have a complicated raya. This is going to be a much easier raya for us to understand. Not fuzzy logic. It's direct. The same achloikis that Rabbi Yossi has with the Chachamim b'shtei lechem. V'cheinat ha'omer b'lach metoida. V'cheinat ha'omer b'michas mafe. Isn't that an easy raya? Gishbach.
Because we already explained it.
Yeah. No, it says it oven grub. Instead of having to make the yukim from the oilim and this is like straight out. Okay, gewaltig. Zog to Gemara weiter.
What was it, Shiloh?
I guess they didn't know the brisa. They didn't know the brisa. Tana Rabbanan. B'shash shchita chishev. So we know there's something called ein mefaglin b'chatzi matir, according to the Chacham. Rameir is mefaglin b'chatzi matir. So what's b'chatzi matir? Again, you have 2 kifsei etzeres. They're co-matirin. They're parallel. And if you have a kavanas pigel, when you sheklin keves 1 and not keves 2, it won't be pigel. Right? That's what we said in the Rabbanan of Rameir. Right? So what happens if you had kavana b'shas shchita chishev lechal chatzi zayis u'b'shas rika chishev lechal chatzi zayis? That is pigel. Mepnei shchita uzrika mitztarfin. Now you might ask, why isn't this pigel b'chatzi matir?
On the same animal?
Yeah, we're talking about the same animal. Why is it pigel b'chatzi matir? The teretz is, when you did the shchita, that's the full matir. They're sequential, right? They go in order. When you do the shchita, that's the only matir. When you do the Kabbalah, that's only matter. When you do the Halacha, that's only matter. When you do the Rika, that's only matter. But by the Kisvei Teresh, when you do the Shechid of Kisvei A, of Keves A, it's not the only matter. You still need Keves B. So therefore, that's going to be a problem of Ein Pigel B'Chatzi Mater, but this would not be relevant. It's considered Kol Mater. When he made the Shechita, he had in mind that he's going to eat a Chatzi Kezayis Bosser of the Korban Chutz L'Zmanoi. So let's say it was a Shlomim. By the shchita, he had in mind that when you eat the basar of the shlomim, 3 days from today. And then when he did his rika, he had kavanah to eat another chatzi gezayis of that same basar.
Different katzis that.
Correct.
The same.
That's right, because otherwise you don't have a gezayis at all.
And it didn't
Yeah.
say that.
But Baruch Hashem, we figured it out.
Okay.
So Zog to Gemara, Ika de Amri, there are those who say that that's only shchita and zrika, the tarvaya matirin. They're the main matirin, because the halacha, the Kabbalah are just accessories to the process, but they're not the actual matir, right? The shchita is matir the dam, was zrika, and the zrika is matir the bas or lachila. But Kabbalah by lachaloi, they wouldn't be mitzaref half and half. The Ika de Amri, madech hanech de marachon, the shchita and the zrika are very far apart. There's two avoiders in between them, Kabbalah and halacha. Yet we're still mitzaref them for kol shegein hani the mekarvin. So that is the halacha that we learned, that you could be mitzaref in sequential avoidas. You can be mitzaref half a gezayis from an earlier avoida to a half a gezayis from a later avoida. Good. Frank Lamar Eni, is that so? But Tani Levi seemed to have quoted a brisa that argues on what you're saying. Because what did Levi quote? Arba avoidos ein mitzarefos lepigel. Shchita, Uzrika, Kabbalah Vailacha. Amarabba, in the Chanami, Takamachlekes Tanoim, exactly as you said it. Likasha, Harebi Harabanan. We actually have a recorded machlekes between Rebbe and Rabbanan about just this, whether or not you could be mitzarev Shchita Tizrika. The Tanya we learned, Hashoichet es a keves. We had this Rebbe at the top of Amud Aleph just now. Hashoichet is a keves, lechel chati zayis michalazu, v'chein chaverei lechel chati zayis michalazu. If you remember, we said that sai chatzi matir and sai chatzi achila. So each half a matir, you have two pagamim. You have sai, each one's a chatzi matir, and each chatzi matir didn't even have a full achila. Right? There's two things against it. So what did Rebbe say? Rebbe oimer ani. I say shezeh kosher. This is 100% kosher. There's not even a gzeira. It's 100% kosher. It's a kosher carbon. Omer le Abaye, zokt Abaye, Amar the shamas leila Rebbe. Where did you see Rebbe's matir? That's where it's chatzi matir and chatzi achila. That's not what we're discussing. We're discussing kulay matir v'chatzi achila. The shchita is the whole matir. The zrika is the whole matir. It's not a keves 1 or keves 2. So how do you know that Rebbe over there as well would say it's not mitzaref and would say that it's not pigel? Kulei matir v'chatz achila mishameslei. How do you know Rebbe over there says it wouldn't be pigel? Omalei Rava bar Avchanan la'Abaye. I'll tell you how I know that Rebbe holds that would also be mutter. Because v'istlei Rebbe kulei matir v'chatzi achila. If he held that that would also be pigel, then he wouldn't have even been matir, a chatzi matir and a chatzi oichel, because he would have been geyser. Ligzer chatzi matir v'chatzi achila, atu kulei matir v'chatzi achila. He should have at least made a gzeira. He said, oimer ani, that it's kosher. He could have said, it's pigel vein bekaris, osher vein bekaris, which would be a gzeira. So the Gemara just taught us that Osir ve'ein bekaris means it's a gzeira, right? Which is going to explain Rabbi Yosy in our Mishnah. What did Rabbi Yosy say in our Mishnah on, I believe, Yud Gimel Amud Beis? In the case of Shachat Shnei Kavosam Lechel Achas V'Nachalish L'Macher. No, I'm not. Shachat Shnei Kavosam Lechel Achas V'Nachalish L'Macher. Hikler Shnei Bezich Lechel Achad V'Na Sedar L'Macher. Rabbi Yosy Emer Oisechala Voice has said the Shechisha V'Lav Pigol is Chayav L'Karis. Hasheni Posel Ve'In B'Karis. That's a gzeira. Posel Ve'in B'Karis means it's a gzeira. It's not pigol. So why is it also? It's a gzeira. Let's go back to the previous top. Yud Gimel Amud Beis. Shachat. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to miss 10 letters to get to the previous blot. The first mission in the parak. Hakoyim et mincha lachel shirah oy lahak kamoy to come to l'machar moed Rabbi Yosy shu pigol. But what about lahak levoy nasel l'machar? Rabbi Yosy omer pasol ve'in bekaris. He doesn't say it's mutter. He says pasol ve'in bekaris. Why? He's geyser. So zok to Gemara, Rebbe, even if Rebbe holds that chatzi zayis and chatzi matir is mutter, he should have been, if he held that chatzi zayis and kulei matir was usher, he would have been geyser. How do I know? Because everybody's geyser, as we just illustrated. Zok to Gemara, Rabbi Omer Imani, Shizak Kosher Amalei Abai, Image of Rabbi Chatzi Matir, Chatzi Eichel, Chatzi Chila, Kula Matir, Chatzi Chila, Misha Mislei, Amalei Rabbi Bar Chanin Labaye. If he did hold like that, then it would be usher by Chatzi Matir and a full Achila. The Rabbi Kula Matir v'Chatzi Achila, then he would have also ushered by Chatzi Matir and Chatzi Achila because of Gzeira. Ligzer Chatzi Matir v'Chatzi Achila, Otu Kula Matir v'Chatzi Achila. Vosepis, because that is the flavor. Everybody's geyser. The Rabbi Yosy gazar, Rabbanan gazri. And now we're going to illustrate the gzeres that we see clearly Rabbi Yosy made, and the gzeres that we clearly see the Rabbanan made. Rabbi Yosy goes with the Tanan, the very first Mishnah in our parak that we just looked up. Lahakdi levay nasa lemachar. Rabbi Yosy held that ein matir mefagel matir. So having kavana on the levayna while you're doing the kmitza won't be pigel. Rabbi Yosy Omer pasol ve'in bekaris. Why pasol ve'in bekaris? It should be mutter. It's not pigel. The teretz is geyser. The chachamim omer pigel b'chayamin l'karis. So that's a clear example of Rabbi Yosy being geyser by pigel. V'rabbanan nami gazri, and the Rabbanan also have a gzeira. The Tanan we learned. This is the machlokes by ein mafagim b'chatzi matir that we just had on Amud Aleph. Pigel b'kaimetz v'loy b'levayna. Or b'levayna b'loy b'kaimetz. Again, these are each a chatzi matir because you have to be maktir inside the koimet, inside the levina. So if you only had a machshava pigel by legabe one, not legabe the other, Reb Meir Arbe pigel v'chayoven lov karish kaz yesh mefagel mechatzi matir v'chachamim maimerim ein by karish ad sheyifagel b'chol matir. But it's going to be usher. Why is it usher? It's exer d'Rabbanan. Zok Gemara, yes, in those cases there was a very valid reason for the gzer to be made. But there's no valid reason for Rebbe to have made a gzera in this circumstance. So now we're going to go through a whole bunch of examples of where gzeras were made, and the Gemara is going to analyze why they were made. Because a very similar case would be pigol deraisa. But in Rebbe's scenario, there is no reason to be geyser by chatzi mater and chatzi oichel that it should be usher, because there's nothing similar to it. That's going to be the Gemara's argument. Now we'll get into the details. So based on that, what was the whole raya? What was the whole raya of Abaye? What was the whole time of Rabbi Bar Chanan? That if he held that was usher, he would have been geyser. So Abaye, no, he held that's usher, and he wasn't geyser because he held you don't have to make a gzera. So therefore, you'd have a raya that Rebbe would say that they are not mitzaref. So we were looking for a Tana that held that you can't be mitzaref to shchita with the zrika. That could be Rebbe. Zok to Gemara weiter. Amalei hachiyashta. Now we're going to go through the different gzeres and why they're relevant. Bishlam ahasam. So now we're talking about the first Mishnah of our parak, where Rabbi Yosy said that while you're making the kmitza, you had the machshava to be makted the levoina chus lezmanoi. That's only asur midrabanan. Why was he geyser? Geyser Rabbi Yosy kaimetz the levoina atu kaimetz the mincha. Because if he would have made a kaimetz and had in mind to be makted the kaimetz chut lezmanoi, that would be pigol deraisa. Right? That's the first case of the Mishnah where he says moed Rabbi Yosy. So since a very similar case to the case of having kavana to be makted levaina chus lezmana would be pigol deraisa, so he's geyser pigol derabanan. Rabbanan, gazri, kaimetz. What about the Rabbanan who held that even though you only had kavana pigol on the kaimetz, but not by the levaina, so that's ein, they hold ein pigol b'chatzi matir, yet they still held it would be aser. Why? Because gazri kaimetz atu kaimetz the minchas chayte. By a minchas chayte, guess what? There is no levina. So by a minchas chayte, if I only had kavana of pigol legabi the kaimitz and not legabi levina, that's pigol deraisa. So this very same case, with this very same kavana of pigol in a different scenario would be pigol deraisa. So it makes sense. Since this very same case in a different carbon would be pigol deraisa, so here he makes it pigol derabbanan. Or ulevina atu levina. Or if he had kavanah by the levina and not by the kaimitz, right? Because that's also chatzi mater. In the case of where the only levina, for instance, levina baba v'zichin. If it was only levina, for instance, by the lechem upon him, there, if you had kavanah only on the to be marked levina chutz lezmanoi, that would be pigol deraisa. Because weiter there's no chatzi mater over there. Or kavasim.
And therefore what? So that if I had,
therefore, there's a welcome to make a gzeira.
So if I had pigel on lavoina for a regular mincha,
He would aser midrabanan, because if I had that same kavana by a mincha that only had lavoina, it would be deraisa. Kavasim nami keves atu keves chaveri. So Rashi tells us, this is where, since I couldn't prepare good last night, I have to look at Rashi and I can't just rattle off the case. So Rashi is keves. The Ami Rabbanan b'masnisin. The Rabbanan said in the Mishnah, Shachat echad min hakvasim lechol beis chalois l'machar, oy hikter echad min habazichen lechol shnei sedarim l'machar, which is by the lechem upon him, the Ka'ami Rabbanan ein by kares hapsolika. There the Rabbanan said, even though there's no kares, it's still possible. I believe this is Tezayin. No, it's Ilam Ralph. I'm embarrassed. We just learned this Gemara. So what was the case? Shachat echad min hakvasim lechol beis chalois l'machar.
That we didn't learn.
Mishnah on the bottom.
Which Mishnah is it? I don't think we looked yesterday. No, let me have a look.
No, it's the next mission.
It's the next Mishnah, right?
In front of us.
Oh, it's the Mishnah coming up. No, the Mishnah. No, no, I think that's Tezayin. Let's not look at Tezayin Amar Aleph. Pretty sure it's Tezayin Amar Aleph.
No, it's the past Mishnah. You give all the base.
What does it
The
say
one
there?
that we did yesterday.
What does it say?
Shokash Nekavos, Lech Lech, Mina Chalas,
Yeah,
Lech.
that was yesterday.
That was
Oh.
the
No,
start.
no, in the middle of the sign.
Another one?
Middle of the sign.
In the middle of Tezayin Amar Aleph. I
Shechem
thought.
Megosem Lachel Chalul Macher.
Middle of Tezayin Amar Aleph here, it says right.
That Mishnah.
Shachat Echem Nekvasim, Lecho Beis Chalas L'Mocher. What do you refer to?
That's not.
You're talking about, our Mishnah is only one Chala. So it's the Mishnah Tezayin Amar Aleph. Shachat Echad Min HaKvasim, Lecho Beis Chalas L'Mocher, or Hikter Echad Min HaBazichen, Lecho Beis Sedorm L'Mocher. Reb Meir Omer Pigol, the Chayanol of Chorus, because Yesh Mefaglin B'Chatzi Matir, the Chamar Me'em B'Chorus At Shifagel B'Chola Matir, right? But he still says it's Osir, so he's Geyser. So once again, Keves Nami, Kvasim Nami, Keves Atu Keves Chaveroi, because if you're going to do both, it would be Pigol Daraisa. Bazach, Atu Bazach Chaveroi. If you would do both, it would also be Daraisa. So in a very similar case, would be also Daraisa, there's justification to make a Gzeira. But over here, where is there justification to make a Gzeira? Elahacha, the case of Shtei Alechem is such a unique case where you have two parallel matirin, you're not going to find anything similar to this. Elahacha mi ika chatzi mater v'chatzi achila v'olma. Will you find such a case anywhere? The Leikum v'ligzer? You're not going to find anything similar. So therefore, there's no reason to be geyser. So therefore, it's quite possible that, in fact, Rebbe holds that if it was the full matir, like the shchita or the zrika, and each one is only a chatzi achila, it's very possible that Rebbe would hold that would be aser. Let's see Rashi. Aval hacha v'chatzi matir v'chatzi achila. The Rebbe of Rebbe's case. Mi ika chatzi mater v'chatzi achila b'ama. Can you think of any other case in the Torah where there's a scenario of a chatzi mater and a chatzi achila where it would be pigel? The nigzer hacha atu asam. We're not going to make a different case. It has to be a case that's very similar to this case that would have an issur daraisa. Then and only then would Rebbe make the gzeira. Zok to Gemara and hachanami mistavra. The time of the Rabbanon, Mishum Hachihu. It's mistaver to say that the reason why the Rabbanon said that it's Osir is because of Gzeira. Because he adds something to the Brisa that's really out of place. The Katani Seifa, the Seifa of the Brisa says, Moidim Chacham Reb Meir. The Chachamim would be Moida to Reb Meir, who holds Mefagel Mechati Matir, by a Minchas Choyte, where there is no Chatzi Matir because there is no Levina, and the Minchas Knois as well where there's no Levina, Shem Pigol B'Kaimetz, Shem Pigol B'Chayovin Olav Kares. Shekayim to a Matir. Why do I need the Gemara to tell me, the Brisa to tell me that the Chacham is going to a mayor? That has no shaykhs to Mefagel B'Chatzi Matir. There's no Chatzi Matir here. It's only one Matir. So why is he throwing it in now? It must be that the Chachamim are moidi there that it's aser, and that's why here they aser midirabanan. Halam lilamis neklal. What's a negeya? Pshita. Mika mater achvina. Those are all places where there's only one mater. There's no two matir over there. Elav hakamash lan. The Rabbanan wanted to hint to them. The time of the kaimates. You know why we're answering the kaimates, even though we hold ein mefagim b'chatzi mater and it's not pigol daraisa. Mishum the ika kaimes the michas chayte the damilei. There's a similar case of the michas chayte where it will be asher deraisa. Therefore, it's warranted here we should make a gzeira. But you'll never find any case similar to chatzi mater and chatzi zayis that is asher that Rebbe would have any need to asher. In the case of chatzi zayis and chatzi mater, even midrabanan. So therefore, the maskon is that Rebbe holds chatzi zayis and chatzi mater is kosher, but Chatzi Zayis and a full matir is going to be Osir al Pigel, and therefore he's going to hold that the half the Kazai is Pigel b'shas the Shchita, and the half the Kazai is Pigel b'shas the Zrika is going to be Osir Midaraisa. So going back to the first wide line, Vatani Levi, Arba Vodis Aimid Starvois, Lakasha Harabi Harabanon, Rebbe is the one who holds that he will be Mitzaref, and the Rabbanon would be the one who hold that they're not Mitzaref. Gewaltig. Now let's finish with my joke and let's learn the next Mishnah. Mitmas achas min achalois, or echad min asedorim. What if one of the kivzei atzeres became tamei, or one half of the lechem upon him became tamei? Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, shneim yetzu lebeis hasreifa. If part of it becomes tamei, the whole thing is garbage. She'ein carbon tzibur cholok. You can't split up a carbon tzibur. In a carbon yochid, if one piece of meat got tamei, so that's tamei that you burned, but you can still eat the rest of the meat. But by a carbon tzibur, everything is one unit. No, hatamei b'tumasoi. Whatever became tamei, you discard. V'atar yoichel, but the tar yoichel could be eaten by the kahan. Amar Rabbi Lozer, Zok Rabbi Lozer, machloikis. This whole machloikis as to whether or not you would throw everything away if part of it became tamei, that's only lefnei zrika. That's if part of the carbon became tamei before the zrika, or before the haktaras halavoina, before the matir. Aval achar zrika, once the zrika was done already, divrei akoil hatamei b'tumasoi va'atar yoich. Everybody holds after the zrika, every piece of meat, everything is for itself. Every piece of bread, everything is independent. What is the machloikas? In other words, you have to think to yourself, why, just because one became tamei, should you say that the zrika won't work for the other? Omer Papa, you know what the machloikas is about? Betzitz miratza ala chilois kamifavei. Will the tzitz be miratza? We know that tzitz is miratza if part of the carbon becomes tamei. So the question is, will the tzitz be miratza over here? As the Gemara elaborates. Rabbanon Savri, the tzitz is miratza ala chilois, and Rabbi Yehuda Savri, eina tzitz miratza ala chilois. And Rashi explains. Rabbanon Savri, a tzitz miratza al tumas achilas kaihanim, l'mahav zrika, shenizruka leim zrika mal yosa. Even though part of the shirayim that should be eaten by the kaihanim are tamei, and the kohen won't be able to eat it, but the zrika will still be a good zrika, and therefore be matter the rest of the carbon, and therefore whatever is tamei you burn, but whatever is not tamei, the kaihanim will be able to eat. However, if a zoyvite, the tzitz doesn't make it ois tamei. The tzitz just said that the zrika will be matter all carbon, and at least the other lechem that didn't become tamei can be eaten. But no one's going to suggest that they're allowed to eat the lechem aponim that actually became tamei. When we kimirata tzitz lemahava carbon ma'alya, that just makes it that the whole carbon should be good. Avol tomei le'mishur b'achila. So if they shechted an animal as a shlomim, and one of the pieces of meat became tomei, yes, the dam will be miratzah the carbon, and it'll allow us to eat the rest of the meat, but you surely won't be able to eat the meat that became tomei. The tzitz never allows you to eat meat that's tomei. The ovid lebalav, there's a lav. It says about boser asher yiga b'chol tomei lo yeyachel. So you for sure can't eat it, but at least the fact that it's tamei won't make it that the zrika sadam won't work. So the rest of the carbon is ratza. That's how the rabbanon hold. You only burn what's tamei, and the rest the kohen can eat. But the Yehuda eina tzitz meratza bituma shenoga b'davar nechal kehanim. Once even part of it is tamei, the tzitz will no longer be meratza on it. Hilach lehav zrika ma'alya. The whole zrika is disqualified. V'loi mishteri tar, and even the tar won't get the heter of the zrika because the tzitz is not maratza. Okay, we'll stop here and Bez Hashem, we will finish this. This was a tough plot.
The zrika is the matter of the shrine.
The zrika is the matter, the shiraim is the dover haniter. The shiraim gets eaten, the zrika is the matter.
Right.
Oh, you mean when by the karbanos that you have to pour the
Yeah,
shiurei
yeah,
dam?
yeah.
Oh, that shiurei dam will also be a chelik of the matter.
Also the
It will also be a chelik of the matter.
So it's a chatzi matter, so it's too much,
No, because whenever it's sequential, we said there's no problem with Chatzi Matir. And since the Zrika has to occur before the Shvicha Shirayim, so at each stage of the game, it's the full Matir.
But it's separated by others, something else, no?
In the Chanami.
Doesn't matter.
Well, just like Zrika is separated from the Shchita by the Halach and the Kabbalah, as long as when you're doing that Avodah, that's the whole game. You really, if anybody has a minute, it was Kedai to learn the Rashi and the Amar Aleph, I just spoke it out. That difference between if there's two parallel Matir versus if you're doing the full Avodah. But Rashi actually makes that very, very clear on yesterday's block, on Yudalat Amar Aleph, Ulafukim Midir Meir, where Rashi discusses specifically the machlokes of Ein Mefaglan B'Chatzi Matir. So if you look at it, Rashi, Ulafukim Midir Meir. So here Rashi goes through all the different scenarios and makes everything gishmak. The Omar B'Soif Masnisin Mefaglin B'Faglin Ba'Avodas Chatzi Matir. Right? Reb Meir says you could be Mefagel Ba'Avodas Chatzi Matir. Meaning, if during the Kmitza you had kavana only to be marked at a Kmitza Chutz Manoi, and you weren't thinking about the Levoina, Reb Meir holds that will be pickle anyway. The Katani, what does it say in the Brisa? Shachat echad min akvosim lechol shtei chalois l'mocher. That's a Chatzi Matir. Reb Meir Omer pigel v'chayavin l'avkaris. Reb Meir holds pigel v'chayavin l'avkaris, even though it's only a Chatzi Matir, you didn't check the second one yet. V'ikash evek Rashi hakaymitzis hamincha, when you make kmitza on the mincha, amai poisel b'machshavosai. Why should your machshav of pigel pasel it? Ha'avoid is Chatzi Matir hu. The kmitza of the mincha is only avoid the Chatzi Matir. The economic levaina. That avoided that you're doing the kmitza on is the dough part. But there's a whole parallel set of matirim that you need, which is levaina. So why isn't, by definition, the kmitza Chatzi Matir? Terit sagt Rashi, b'kmitza vada avoid shleimahi. The kmitza avoid is an avoid shleima because there's nothing parallel there. The leko kmitza levaina. There is no, if a kmitza would be required by the levaina as well, so then you have two parallel avoidas, it's a Chatzi Matir. But at that stage in the chronology, only the kmitza is required. That's a full matir. Teda, by the Haktarah, it's a different story. Because by the Haktarah, it is two parallel. Because you have to be marked to the Levaina and you have to be marked to the Kaimitz. Teda, the Haktarah's Kaimitz, im Chisha v'lechel shirayim l'mochar, there's a machlokes over there. Peligi Rabbanan, v'amri kivan the economy Haktarah's Levaina, that's parallel to the Haktarah's Hamincha itself. Loichashivi Haktarah's Kaimitz lefagel, because it's a Chatzi Matir. Only Reb Meir holds. So if at this stage in the game this is the only thing that needs to get done, that's not a Chatzi Matir. It's only a Chatzi Matir if you're on the stage that you need two parallel things to occur. That's a Chatzi Matir. The Katani Masnisin Pigel Bahaktaras Kaimetz V'loy B'Levaina. That's where there's a shaila. That's where the Chachamim say the Chachamim ain't Pigel at Shifaka B'Chol Matir. That's not about Haktara. The Chachamim never said that halacha by the Kmitza because the Kmitza is not a Chatzi Matir. Vikasher fekt Rashi, Hokim the Bereish Perkin, Lechula Alma, Mefaglim V'Chatzi Matir. We actually said everybody knows Mefaglim V'Chatzi Matir. Why? Because we learned in Daf Yud Gimel Amar Aleph, the Ketani HaKoimetz, Almanas, Lahaktir, Koim Tzolomachar, there Rabbi Yosy is Moida, that's 100% Pigel. But what about the Levaina? For our Lechisha of Ella Al Chatzi Matir, Laktor's Koimetz, he didn't think about the Levaina. So why is that a Chatzi Matir? The teretz is because you don't look at what he's thinking about. You look at what he's doing. La pirchi, the loydami lahai dahacha. That's not similar to our case. The hazam chishev al Chatzi Matir, but when was he having this kavana? B'shas avodah shleima. While he was doing the kmitza, where that's the only matir. Yeah, he might have been thinking about in the future to do the Chatzi Matir wrong. That's not the problem. The problem is only if the avodah that he's doing is a Chatzi Matir. V'hai chishev b'shas Chatzi avodah could go in shchitas echad ben akvasim. What's Chatzi Matir? When you're shechting one of the kvasim, that's only Chatzi Matir because there's a parallel kevis that has to be shechted right now. But when you're at a stage where this is the only avodah that you have to do, like the shchita or the zrika, like we mentioned on number base, that's not Chatzi Matir. Because at this point in time, this is the only thing that has to get done. So therefore you can have a kavana of a half a zayis by the shchita and the kavana of a half a zayis by the zrika, and they will combine nicely, and it's no problem with Chatzi Matir.
Did we not learn last week that there is some sort of kmitza by Levain? Like, remember if you hop around?
No, we actually learned yesterday. You just have to be gathered. There was even a shayla for Yisrael could do it yesterday. Remember yesterday? We
So all you do is just
you gather it up and you throw it on the mizveh.
It's not a kmitza.
That's right.
So that sounds like the whole chiluk that you just made is because I'm not doing a kmitza with the levoina.
There's
But I'm
no
doing-
action required. You just put it on the mizbeach.
That's an action.
No,
I can have people on that.
no,
same
just
action.
placing it on in no specific way. I guess the Gemara doesn't consider
Doesn't
an
consider
avoid.
climate.
That's right.
Because your kvasim, you're saying, is even though they're two different animals, not because the avoiders are exactly the same, then they become
No,
parallel.
because there are two parallel things. This has to get done separately, and this has to get done
And
separately.
the levoina and the kmitza also has to get done separately.
The Haktorah, only the Haktorah.
Torah.
And that's true. By the Haktorah, it is going to be Chatzi Mater. It's only by the Kmitza. During the stage of the
Kmitza
Kmitza, there's nothing at this point that needs to be done with the Levoina. The Levoina skipped a step.
Right.
Once you're at a step where they both have to be done, now you're back into the Chatzi Mater situation.
Got it. Even though the action might be a little bit different.
I'm sorry?
You need to put it in the Kli.
The Levoina? No, you don't.
It never went into the Kli.
Doesn't have to be put into the Kli.
I thought it did have to be put into
The Levoina, no. The Kmitza has to be put into the Kli.
And
Not
it's a-
Levoina.
and it's a foul one.
Oh, the only time the Levoina goes into the Kli is by the Lechem Aponim. But a regular Mincha, you just gather it up and put it on the Mizbech.
How would you throw it?
I'm sorry?
How
They
would you
sold
throw
it. They sold it in little shakers.
How would he throw be matter it?
Maktir it.
No, it's wrong. That the Haktorah is Zichar of the
No, the
Levoina.
Levoina, I'm saying.
That's Zichar, no. That would Zichar be an avodah. The Gemara wanted to know if a Yisrael could be malakit. If you could just gather it up and then hand it to a kohen.
Kohen.
So the Gemara said that'll be part of the halacha. The Gemara said the reason why it's possible is because it's part of the halacha. Remember the Gemara yesterday wanted to know, is it a part of the halacha,
Right,
or is it because it's a necessary step?
Right.
So if it's part of the halacha, maybe then you have to hold that yesh halacha without feet. What was the lashon? Halacha beregel, shloi beregel, halacha shloi beregel. My son Menachem spoke by Zoifruf. So he said, I was learning the sugya of halacha shloi beregel. It's a very difficult sugya. And he says, I couldn't get it through my head. I didn't understand what halacha shloi beregel. Mamish couldn't get it through my head. So then I chapped why. I couldn't understand halacha shloi beregel. Because my parents, when they did something for us, they did it with the ganze with the regel. So there was no such thing as halacha shloi beregel. Everything they didn't do anything haphazardly. They just passing. They mamish charangaton thing. So I like that shot very much. You know? I like flattery. Flattery will get you everywhere. But he brought up halacha shloi. What's shaychas hatas? So his shver chapped to know. It was a cute sush though. Okay, gewaltig. So now, I didn't shut off the recording yet.